All right, I could talk your ear off about 20-inch vintage Zildjian rides as demonstrated by the 4 prior very long takes of this video. So I'm going to try to keep this short and sweet, or a little tighter anyway, and do a quick shootout of 4 different vintage Zildjian rides. These are rides, these particular 4 are from the 60s and 70s, and I've tried to choose ones that are pretty typical in character, that they don't have any sort of specialty shape or something unusual about them, so that they mostly differ by their weight. That's really what I'm doing this shootout about, is the weights, the relative weights of different ride cymbals from that era. In my experience, the available weights of vintage Zildjian rides are 1900 grams through about 2600 grams. And 1900 is hard to find. 2000 is typically the lightest you actually will find. And that's going to be smoky, crashable, washy, a real wet kind of sound. And then moving on towards 26, which will be very heavy, pinpoint, focused, articulate, almost glassy sometimes. 2200 is going to be a sort of typical medium ride. Like, that's probably what you're shooting for if you just want to have like a classic rock ride sound from that era. And 24 would be if you are a heavier player, but you also want most of that characteristic, but probably not crashable. But you still want that kind of Ringo ride, then 24 is a good choice. 26 is a really specific choice in my experience. I'm going to play the 3 tools of each of these rides, and by 3 tools, as you may have heard me say in other videos, what I really mean are that a ride cymbal, I would evaluate 3 things about it. What's its riding surface like? How does it sound? How quickly does it build up? How quickly does it recover after being crashed? And then its bell, how proud is that bell? How much does it cut through? How much how distinct is the tone of the bell from the tone of the cymbal? Is there a spread in the pitch of those two? And then finally, the crashability of the edge. If you actually want to use this at the end of a fill and hit it, is it going to be an embarrassment, or is it going to sound okay? And one of the great things about vintage Zildjians is that in this era, there's still kind of an expectation that a ride would be crashable, sort of a holdover from the jazz tool set. And so, as a rule, vintage Zildjians are kind of crashable compared to modern cymbals anyway. So I'm just going to go around all these with a stick and go straight from one to the next so that you can hear the difference as I move. Then I'll come back and do a little bit with mallets or brushes, just to show some other characteristics. I hope that these are going to sound different enough to you. Otherwise, it's going to be a pretty stupid shootout. It's already pretty stupid, but here we go. Okay, so again, it's 19, 22, 24, 26, and change for each of those. Here are brushes on each real quick. And then here are mallets across each real quick. Okay, so my thoughts on these before I leave you. So I think it pretty much played, at least to my ear in this room, and I hope it came across on my phone. I think it pretty much played out the way that I described it. This one is definitely more, takes energy and rides with it a lot easier. It's very easy to light the cymbal up. It's very easy to push it and bring it back. The edge is very crashable, and with brushes, I don't know if you noticed that by the time I reached the 24 with the brushes, I couldn't crash the edge with just a brush anymore. It would just sound like riding it. I think that this one was smoky and that one was glassy, and that one was focused and this one was kind of, washy and a little bit wet. So I think that those characteristics I described played out. I think that if I were trying to advise a rock player who just wants sort of a classic rock Zildjian sound, go for the 22, especially if you play a light gauge stick and maybe occasionally need to play jazz. Definitely the 22 is probably the most versatile of those. If you're strictly a jazz player and you want a very smoky ride because you've got a secondary ride that's super dry, the 19, I love having a 1900 gram. And then, like I said, the 24 is good for a rock player who's got a heavier stick, who doesn't need it to be a finishing crash, just wants it to be that ride sound. And then the 26, you're kind of on your way to a dry ride, but it still has that sustain, which is great. So I love vintage Zildjians. I might do a similar look at crashes, because obviously there the weights just go crazy. Leave a like and a comment if you like this, or if you have something else that you want to point out about these, or something that you'd like me to try. I've got a bunch of other vintage Zildjians sitting around, and I'm primed to do a shootout. Like I said, I love talking about them, and so there you go. All right, have a good one, and talk to you later.